So I've been doing a little reading, and I've got this book, okay? It's an interesting book. It's by a guy by the name of Donald Katz, okay? It's called The Valley of the Fallen and Other Places. And it's a collection of essays. Hear me carefully. It's a collection of essays that were written between 1976 and 1992 by this man, Donald Katz, who has Arkansas roots, okay? By this man, Donald Katz, that has Arkansas roots. He's a contributing editor to Rolling Stone, falls squarely within the first-person literary journalism genre and that sort of thing, okay? So we go over here, and I've got some of this book, and I just wanted to read it to you because it is so Arkansas. There's a section on Arkansas, and it's all-encompassing, and it really paints a picture of where we are, okay? Really paints a picture of who we are, where we came from, according to this. So, again, this is by Donald Katz. One time there was a feller from Illinois, and he heard a lot of wild tales about Arkansas. More than one of the old stories begins like that. I first heard about Arkansas when I was a small boy in Chicago. My great-uncle, Dave Katz, used to sit on the edge of one of our comfortable chairs during his trips north and talk about the fish and the rivers and the woods of his Ozarks. I knew he was considered a real pioneer in Harrison, Arkansas, and I wondered how a real American pioneer could come from Germany and say, "Dat one." One of the old Sunday afternoon conversations, the ancient hills of the Arkansas Ozarks became a special place for me because somehow my uncle always seemed like the brave men in the books. That's on his father's side, okay? Then you read on, and you learn on his mother's side of the family were our Arkansas Flatlanders. Louis Altimer, my great-great-grandfather, sailed from Germany in 1863. At the age of 14, convinced that the truly brave and free men of his time lived in Arkansas. He had discovered this in a popular book by a German named Friedrich Gerstacker, who wrote glowingly of horse thieves and duels in Arkansas. Arkansas was the ambivalent edge of human civilization, the meeting place of barbarian and pioneer. It had been explored by Spaniards almost a century before the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Rock, named by Frenchmen, taken from Indians, worked by the descendants of Africans, and owned by a lordly race of Anglo-Saxon planters. It was just the spot for a German Jewish boy fleeing from one of the most settled existences in history. So it talks further. The book goes on. I love that characterization, though. Don't you love that characterization of Arkansas? I thought it was just really interesting. So it talks about this guy, Louis, right? So Louis rode the range of Wyoming with Buffalo Bill Cody for a while. Then he came back to a town called Pine Bluff, a backwater area even by Arkansas standards. He cleared and drained alluvial swampland for a large plantation and convinced the Cotton Belt Railroad to run tracks by his farm. A depot was built, and Louis Altimer had himself a town, Altimer, Arkansas. He had conquered the chunk of the New World called by nothing less than his own family name, as he noted in his autobiographical essay modestly titled Louis Altimer, Empire Builder. Dan Katz writes, Arkansas had been kind. So we scroll a little further down, and we find out that his grandson, named Maurice, eventually left Arkansas, kind of had a hard time. It paints pictures of the Ku Klux Klan marching in Little Rock and things like that on Main Street. Talks about how a lot of people started to leave Arkansas at that time. Thousands of people fled Arkansas, as my grandfather did, faster and faster with each successive decade. Now, listen up, folks, because this is part of the reason why. This sets up a lot of our mentality today and what we expect from government. Not in a bad way. Thousands of people fled Arkansas, as my grandfather did, faster and faster with each successive decade. Blacks going to Chicago or Detroit, whites going to California. There were fewer people in Arkansas in the 1960s than before World War II, hardly the national trend. Bad things just seemed to rain on the state of Arkansas, and good things blew on by like the topsoil. After the Civil War, in which most Arkansans fought for the South, bones protruded from the earth during rainstorms for many years. Disproportionate numbers of young Arkansas men went off to America's 20th century wars, and a disproportionate number never returned. In 1927, the Mississippi River and its tributaries inundated 1/5 of the entire state in what Herbert Hoover called the greatest peacetime disaster in our history, end quote. In 1930, the worst drought on record gripped the South and Southwest, including Arkansas. The following year, 1/3 of the state's residents faced starvation. Arkansans appeared the only defeated Americans of the nation's second century. The 30s in Arkansas lasted well into the 50s, right up until an army of the North occupied the capital of the state in 1957. Somebody's sneering mother appeared on television sets around the world carrying a rowboat oar toward the steps of Little Rock Central High School. In minutes, she transformed an image of grinding poverty and infant mortality into a picture of racism and such virulence. The state, the city of Little Rock, and the governor named Orville Faubus were emblazoned on the consciousness of the time as universal symbols of American wickedness. Now, I've talked many times before on this program of how Orville Faubus and the Little Rock Nine, what that did to our state is kind of akin to a political Stockholm syndrome, where we love our federal overlords. Now, that is not to say that Orville Faubus was right. By no means am I saying that. And here, this book really sheds some light on his socialist tendencies, by the way, of Orville Faubus. We'll get to that here in a minute. But no, it was certainly wrong of Orville Faubus to do what he did. But the result of that has, generation after generation of Arkansans has kind of left us predisposed to thinking that any resistance to what the federal government is trying to do to us must be submitted to as akin to a vassal. And I think Arkansans since that point have been afraid to assert themselves, because while we were wrong one time, that doesn't mean you're wrong every other time when we're not talking about racial issues. That's just my 2 cents. After Little Rock, Arkansas, back to the book. After Little Rock, Arkansas lay locked in cultural, economic, and spiritual stasis for a decade. Its original pioneer dream of spirit, landscape, gristle, and gut lay inert. When news bellowed forth of the hatred and massive resistance to change that had been characteristic of the state of Arkansas for all its long life, my grandfather, along with the former Arkansans of the aircraft plants in California and in the tenements of the northern ghettos, simply assumed that was exactly what the people of Arkansas wanted. Then it goes on to talk about how the state of Arkansas never quite decided which part of the country we feel most comfortable. It's the meeting place of North, South, and West, straddling the geographies of the southern plantation land, isolated Midwestern highlands and flat, rangy western prairie. The different forces on every side produce a sectionalism within the state that is more like that of England than of most parts of the United States. Terrain, history, political attitudes, traditions, and especially accents change with every geographical move. I thought that was interesting. We're going to take a break. I've got more from this, and I'm coming to a point, folks, so you have to stick with me here. You're listening to the Paul Harrell Program. We're building a Liberty machine. Back in a moment. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Getting some good feedback here from this book that we were just referencing. It really characterizes kind of, I feel like, what has got us here, past look at Arkansas. It's a collection of essays by an author by the name of Don Katz. I believe he's also the founder of Audible, by the way. And it's a collection of essays written about all types of stuff. It's not just about Arkansas, I don't believe. And you get to a point where you realize from 1976 to 1992, a collection of essays. So some of this stuff was written in the 80s, I believe, about Arkansas, kind of a reflective look. Talks about how Arkansas started eventually, how the 30s in Arkansas lasted into the 50s. And I want to say something about that. You know why? Because it wasn't just the Great Depression. That we had a bond crisis where our state went bankrupt, okay? Right? So we had a bond crisis, our state went bankrupt, and that with the Great Depression was the reason that our 30s in Arkansas lasted into the 50s and people started leaving in droves and things like that. We need to be real careful that, and I say this obviously I'm no fan of the policies and the agenda of Governor Asa Hutchinson, but we need to be careful that Asa Hutchinson under his leadership doesn't lead us back that direction. This man wants to leverage our state, leverage the full faith and credit of the state of Arkansas and the workers here by giving money away to private companies and doing these giant bond projects. It's one of the reasons he wants this $105 million that the legislature, the lapdog legislature, just gave to him. Okay? It's just very important that we learn from our history. We don't have a good economy right now. Regardless, he just had to cut money from the budget. Our economy is clearly not good. Now we have natural disasters that are going to hurt our tourism and hurt our tax receipts even more. So we have to be very careful that we don't get it back into the same situation. And we're going to get to it more in this hour, where it references Bill Clinton, and it references how Bill Clinton really promoted the state government doing more and more and more for the people. That mentality, that bureaucracy that he set up that catapulted him to a national figure that almost gave Hillary Clinton the White House, okay, that bureaucracy has not been reformed under Governor Asa Hutchinson. It has not. Our tax code has not been reformed under Governor Asa Hutchinson. But the real person, in my opinion, and according to this book, the real person to look at here is a guy named Orville Faubus, not just for the Little Rock Nine, but his entire philosophy, which this book calls socialist. Back in a minute. Did you know that Orville Faubus's dad was a founder of one of Arkansas's few chapters of the Socialist Party of America? Did you know that? Orville Faubus's father was a socialist. Interesting. All right, so we're getting back to this book. The name of the book, hang on, let me give the name again, because we got people asking about it. If you're still listening, The Valley of the Fallen and Other Places by Dan Katz. It's a collection of essays, Donald Katz. It's a collection of essays, 1976 to 1992. And I'm using the Arkansas section here because trying to learn about who we are, and at the same time, not make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. I think over-leveraging the faith and credit of the people of Arkansas in the name of a flawed source of economic development, a flawed theory that has been proven not to work by giving taxpayer money to companies to lure them here, is not the course we should chart. Talks about how Arkansas started to gain a diverse population, mentions, quote, the hippies in the hollow, some of the many Americans representing difference of lifestyles, philosophies, who have suddenly immigrated into the region. Remember, this is written between 1970 and 1992. Isolated and poor for a long time. In the first 7 years of 1970, some Ozark counties doubled in population, and the population of the state as a whole grew 11.5%. The biggest increase was among the 20 to 24-year-old group, a combination of newcomers and upwardly mobile Ozark natives who are staying put for the first time in a century. Okay, we flip some more. I believe this was written in 1980, this next part, okay? There's also, in Arkansas, a burgeoning new political class that the invigorated populace has elected to lead into the light. The current leader in the state is Governor Bill Clinton, 33. When a regional junior college presidents association assembled recently in the rickety spa city of Hot Springs, its chairman delivered an introduction of the governor that would have gotten them both run out of Arkansas 15 years ago. A Rhodes Scholar, Yale graduate, a law professor, brilliant wife, this book says, about to have a brilliant baby, handsome, the youngest attorney general in America, the nation's youngest governor, the youngest governor in Arkansas in 134 years, bound for national politics, end quote. That was what was said. The man stopped after a while. Bill Clinton turned down an offer to work on the Watergate Commission in 1974 in order to come home and run for Congress at the age of 27. He lost, but Arkansas liked Bill Clinton. He won the job of Attorney General in 1976, then won many more friends by taking on the hated utility companies. Today, Clinton presides, again written in 80, over a state administration that reminded me of a college yearbook staff. Donald Katz writes, in each office, the governors, Clinton 33, the Attorney General, Steve Clark, now 33, and the Secretary of State, Paul Riviere, 32, the youngest face belongs to the boss. When I asked one young Clinton aide how hip a governor's office can get and still be taken seriously, she said, well, we all still shave our legs. Wow. Getting any insight into the groundwork that Bill Clinton laid here? Listen to this. Orville Faubus himself once described Justice Jim. This is talking about. Hang on one second. Let me make sure I have my facts state. Let's skip down to. This piece was written in June 1980. I have it in my notes. Though few people outside Arkansas are aware of it, when Orville Faubus first emerged out of the hills, he was fundamentally a liberal, humane individual. His background was actually well to the left of liberalism. His father, Sam Faubus, was an active socialist, a devotee of Eugene Victor Debs, which is less surprising than it sounds. Arkansas's sullied image of intolerance in more recent years has obscured the state's historical role as the nursery of American agrarian radicalism and various other forms of unsophisticated egalitarianism. In the first 2 decades of this century, independent conservative Arkansas had 9 thriving socialist newspapers. When Huey Long was 7 years old, Arkansas already had a governor who had come to power by running against the railroads, invoking antitrust laws as Attorney General, and representing the, quote, plain people of our country. He was later labeled the Karl Marx for hillbillies. As with so many other historical themes long since purged from other politics, the bundled tension of old-fashioned populism is still present in Arkansas, almost as if it had been pickled in brine. Throughout the days of Orville's many infamous antics as governor of Arkansas, a Madison County hill dweller wrote letters under a different name that violently criticized Faubus. Only after Old Sam's death was it revealed that Orville's critic had been his own disapproving father. Now let's just take this. This is so huge. If you want to stop where Arkansas is going now, If you want to know why just changing the name of the letter next to your politician's name from D to R has not solved the major problems that we are facing in this state, which is fundamentally how we view government and what the influence, what the position should be in our lives, okay? If you want to know, then you have to look at who we were. Why were we Democrats for so long? Why were we the last state in the South to go the way we went? It has to do with government philosophy. I'm told that Paul, the Attorney General, was not Paul. It's pronounced Revere, like Paul Revere. Sorry. I mean, that's a huge. This is. I really think. I hope you're with me on this. I hope you see why this is. You know, Orville Faubus called the Karl Marx of hillbillies. This was all happening when Huey Long, Louisiana guy, right? Big socialist guy. He was 7 years old, and yet, I mean, we were real progressive. This was Arkansas, folks. That's why, man. Is that why when platform Republicans, actual limited government conservatives, they start talking about people in Little Rock, they look at you like you're crazy? But the people across this state, and the one thing that hasn't changed is the people across this state, not necessarily their, obviously the political views have changed, their belief in what kind of government we should have has changed, but not their tendency to turn out and vote. And we'll get to that here in just a second. Then you get to the Winthrop Rockefeller. It writes, Winthrop Rockefeller fled to Arkansas in search of solace and an inexpensive divorce in 1953. He found solace atop a flat, high mesa cleft by startling gorges and waterfalls, which he cleared and upon which he built a ranch. He became the first Republican governor of Arkansas since the end of Reconstruction, and by that time he died of cancer. In 1973, it was clear that the color-blind immigrant to the Rockefeller, who always feared he couldn't measure up to his brothers, had been the necessary pre-revolutionary causeway between old and new, between Faubus and Bill Clinton. New way in this context might really have just been the old way with different faces, by the way. But again, this was written in June of 1980. Rockefeller gave government jobs to blacks, brought numerous non-defense-oriented industries into poverty-stricken towns. He also made it rather unfashionable to be a segregationist. Even the white business community began to see there was money in tolerance. Blacks began to vote in increasing numbers. Then it turned out that Justice Jim hadn't paid his taxes for all of his righteous raging, and in retrospect that Faubus had hypocritically abused the power born of Arkansas's love for him, and everyone sort of felt betrayed. A handsome Sunday school teacher by the name of Dale Bumpers emerged from nowhere and said quite simply that segregation was immoral. Bumpers appeared to have asked no one if he could run and owed no man a favor, and the electorate liked that. Bumpers hooked into the positive strains of the submerged populist spirit, just as Orville had worked the negative ones, and in 1970 he ran successfully for governor against Faubus, who had come out of retirement for the occasion. Thereafter, the new breed of Arkansas politicians made startling inroads, again written in 1980. 1974, Senator J. William Fulbright. 1977, Senator John McClellan. He died and was replaced by the Young Turk Governor David Pryor, who first went to Congress from Arkansas at the age of 32. In 1975, after being one of the hardest-working, most effective men in Washington, Congressman Wilbur Mills saw his career abruptly curtailed by his love for drink, an old story newly revealed, and a topless dancer. He was replaced by a 33-year-old Harvard graduate named Jim Guy Tucker, who was previously the Little Rock prosecuting attorney at 27 and Arkansas State Attorney General at 29. The transformation of Arkansas politics was not confined to the top of the political heap. Moreover, the demand for rapid change combined with reemergence of the old populism to produce a new mood at the lowest levels of activity as well. And here, I couldn't believe this was in this book. This was written in 1980, I believe. We're still on the 1980 essay. The Arkansas Community Organizations for Reform. You know what that acronym spells? The Arkansas Community Organizations for Reform. Now ACORN. Currently the nation's most successful association of community activists, began operating under the Arkansas state motto, Regnant Populus, the people rule. Now, let's stop right there. So you're telling me that not only was Arkansas responsible for Bill Clinton, who went to the White House, who from our own backyard, our own bureaucracy, became arguably one of the most powerful political forces in our nation's history, whose wife almost got to the White House, which would have been a complete disaster. Not only that, ACORN was originally called the Arkansas Community Organizations for Reform, which was what Barack Obama, out of Cook County, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, used as his arm to community organize. These are just things we need to realize, and you're not going to hear anyone report on this. You're not going to hear anyone report on why it's such an uphill task that just changing from R or from D to R isn't going to fix it. You're not going to hear anyone really say all of this. Well, except for me. And Donald Katz, excuse me. He says it, but you got to know where to look for this stuff. Listen to what it says. ACORN challenged corrupt legal government, utility company abuses, and corporate power, and tackled many other grassroots issues. See, grassroots issues, but it's all based out of what is, in many ways, a ground that's laid by Faubus, who's called the hillbilly, the Karl Marx for hillbillies. And then you've got Bill Clinton here, and we of course know about Hillary Clinton's essays and papers and things like that she wrote. So you really have to see. I mean, you talk about Fabian socialism. All right, let's talk about Fabian socialism. You know what the Fabian socialists, we've talked about this before, what was their logo? The Fabian socialist logo was literally a wolf covered in sheep's clothing. So behind all of this, Arkansas, good old boy, we're just, it was the perfect breeding ground to, what did Mark Twain say? Brian King said it on the floor, right? It's easier to trick a people than to convince them they've been tricked. It's easier to be a wolf and put on sheep's clothing than for me to try to convince people that, hey, that's not a sheep, that's a wolf. ACORN attracted activists from all over the country into its web-like organization of largely poor Arkansas families, and then spread into 19 other states. Folks, we have to ask, if we want to change Arkansas, if we want the governor to actually listen to limited government, quit spending so much, quit trying to bond Arkansas into debt like we did in the 30s with roads, I think we got to understand something. Our history is the remedy for who we were politically. Oh, and by the way, what does it say about Orville Faubus with what he did and how he viewed blacks, how racist he was? What does it say that he was also called the Karl Marx for hillbillies? What does that say about fascism versus socialism and the phony debate we try to have over it, when it's really, it just seems if you believe government should provide everything, and you eventually also believe that government should be able to control how you think, what's appropriate, and it's about a retraction of freedom, not more freedom. It ends up being less freedom, not more. It attracted activists from all over the country into its web-like organization of largely poor Arkansas families, and then spread to 19 other states like Illinois, where Barack Obama, I'm just a young community organizer. I mean, is it possible? Hear me out. Is it possible that Arkansas is not only responsible for Bill Clinton and almost Hillary Clinton being able to appoint that Supreme Court justice? Are we also responsible partly for creating an organization that helped Barack Obama go into the White House? Organizations such as Acorn, the New Leaders, the influx, again, 1980, the influx of such varied types of people, the fact that the state's youth was staying put, and the pervasive new vision of the future, all of these things. You see, they weren't overtly socialist back then, right? They had to be gradual because there's a psychology here, right? You couldn't say, hey, there's something wrong with America. You couldn't say that back then, but you can say that now because we've got generations of young people now who've been indoctrinated to believe that because America is prosperous, we must have done something so wrong, which nobody's perfect, but what we love to do is take the altruism, the moral standards of today, and we try to apply them to past and say, oh, well, fundamentally, we got to tear down the country. Nonetheless, let's see here. It goes. Dale bumpers for Democratic senatorial nomination this year. At a time when other much less vigorous southern states have long since sent their justice gems to the taxidermist, the old war horses remain part of a stylistic tradition that Arkansans respect. Keeps going. Hang on, we've got a little bit longer here to get to. I want to get to the part. It talks about college football, talks about the Razorbacks, which is really good. Here we go. This is what I want to talk about, the people of Arkansas, okay? Again, Donald Katz, the book is The Valley of the Fallen. The remarkable fact is that while Arkansas is comparatively poor and uneducated, an unusually high percentage of its citizens turn out to vote. And polls show that its electorate is one of the best informed in the nation about complex issues. Even more important, the polls show that Arkansans not only participate in politics, they still believe their participation makes a difference. It's part of this faith in the possibility of progress, of doing better, Clinton said. Clinton shares that faith. He has a specific idea of what Arkansas should be. Central to his vision is the idea that government, particularly state government, can still help people achieve their goals. This, of course, puts him at odds with the enlightened elite in a national political scene dominated by a sense of diminishing expectations. What is the difference in that statement? Central to his vision is the idea that government, particularly state government, can still help people achieve their goals. Doesn't that statement fit right into Arkansas Works? And Governor Hutchinson just admitting and accepting the fact that your health care is the other guy's responsibility by law, that we are born enslaved to one another when it comes to health care costs. Not much has actually changed. We have to take a break. Back in a minute.